You are listening to Themes and Memes, a different kind of movie review. My name is Adam from Cerebral Revolt, and with me here I have my co-host Aaron from The Age of Transitions. How are you doing today, Aaron?
Doing well. It's good to talk again, and it's nice to do a new episode of Themes and Memes.
Yeah, it certainly is. Apologies to the audience in terms of our production rate at the moment, because we got off to a bit of a late start this year, and so we ended up recording our first one at the end of January, and so we're sort of only getting around to the second one now. So, yeah, it's technically not a month-by-month thing, but we'll just keep doing our best and trying to keep up on the schedule that we sort of originally planned, which is as I said, a one episode a month. But if people are not already aware, we now have a new website up for the podcast, which is tmpodcast.com. And we also have a dedicated feed for that called Themes and Memes on Stitcher Radio and on iTunes. So Themes and Memes now has its own platform. It's now an independent project that is, it's really got off the ground, and we'll be continuing to work on that and work on the website and add more material. And as we've discussed before, plenty of ideas that we're talking about and thinking about covering, and so it should be an interesting year. But on this particular episode, we have decided to review the film Jupiter Ascending, which is the Wachowski's latest film. Not a very good film, in my opinion, and I think you would probably agree on that, Aaron.
Yeah, I do agree with that.
Yeah, it's a weird, it's a very, very strange film, and it's difficult to say exactly what's going on with this film in terms of why it is the way it is, because the Wachowskis are typically known for making films which are actually quite good in terms of the general production quality and the depth in terms of the types of themes and concepts that they manage to incorporate into their films, all the way from sort of general sci-fi or political concepts all the way up to kind of occult mystery school concepts and things like that, in mythology and all sorts of things. So it's difficult to say exactly why this film ended up being so bad, and I kind of wonder whether it was because the Wachowskis have just been kind of let off the leash, kind of on the loose on their own.
I tend to think that they're just do their own thing, no stopping them. It just went over the top, more or less. I think that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, over the top would probably be the best way of describing this film. I mean, it's basically like a sci-fi fantasy with no real lead-in, no real proper introductions. I mean, it just goes straight into fantastical, sensationalistic craziness and non-stop action within about 5 minutes or 10 minutes of the film. So again, it kind of fits in with this sort of trend that we've been talking about in our previous reviews in terms of what we've come to define as almost a new genre of filmmaking. This new sort of approach that these production studios and directors seem to be taking towards films, where they just completely overload you with action, and you just get nothing but 2 hours of crazy action sequences and crazy CGI and stuff like that, and very, very thin character development, and a lack of real depth in terms of the plot. And
what set the Wachowskis apart was that they had been able to do all the crazy action and really good sequences like that, but still put in all the hard-hitting, multi-tiered meanings to all the themes within their films. So they made good films, and they put a lot of good action scenes in them at the same time. But with this one, they fell short of the mark for sure.
Yeah. There's kind of something missing in this film, because as we'll get into, there's plenty of occult references and esoteric themes and memes in this film, but there is also, as we discussed, a lot of action in it. But there's kind of a gap there in terms of tying those two kind of aspects together, with some kind of cohesive. I don't know. Plot, I guess. I mean, it was very, very desperate and very sort of messy, and everything felt very rushed. And it was again, I wonder whether this is just like again the Wachowskis kind of being just let off the leash and being able to do whatever the hell they wanted to do without any kind of guidance from a sort of a production team, or whether it's there's some new this sort of ties into this new genre of filmmaking that's deliberately designed to overwhelm you with action.
Yeah, it's funny because these films usually are obviously portraying some sort of establishment or even military goal when they do these action films like this, the agenda-driven filmmaking or whatever we want to call it. But with this film, I'd say that the specific agenda given is one that is sort of a part of the esoteric doctrine of a secret society. I really think that's what's going on here. I mean, it's pretty clear that the Wachowskis are initiates of some order, presumably some Gnostic orders would be my guess. And, they're trying to put in the ideas of that order in their films and promote the cause of whatever their particular order is. Through this film, I mean, they're going all the way with that.
Yeah, well, I think in previous films, like, for example, if we took maybe the Matrix series or maybe even V for Vendetta or even Cloud Atlas, I mean, I think we can see the mystery school traditions and themes and agendas showing through, but it's kind of been done in a way that fits in with the film, and it's done well. It's kind of well coordinated, and I think it's probably more well advised. I think in those previous films, they probably had a team of other higher initiates around them who were guiding them as to how to incorporate these types of films into the film in a way that would work, in a way that would be, sort of that would meet the criteria of what most people would consider to be a good film. And maybe even just
other producers too, like reining them in. There had to be some sort of that going on more so in previous films.
Yeah. Whereas this film, it's again, I mean, one thing that's also interesting to note with this film is it really does seem to touch on a lot of the themes and concepts and beliefs which are very popular within the kind of extreme fringes of the kind of new age UFO alien cults and things like that.
It does bring up a bit of that. Yeah,
there's kind of like a lot of references to some of the concepts that people like David Icke have brought up. It's like I almost wonder if David Icke might have been a consultant for the film or something.
It's possible.
And or perhaps and it gets into the whole ancient astronaut thing, or it doesn't get into that per se, but it makes reference to that or alludes to those types of
alien
concepts.
Bloodlines seeding different planets and all that kind of business. It gets into that.
Yeah. I mean, to give a brief synopsis of the kind of, I guess, the plot in terms of what the basic scenario is. I mean, it presents a scenario where you have a sort of global, a galactic interstellar plutocracy or oligarchy or sort of royal families who actually own planets, right across the universe, and who seed them with genetic technology, possibly there are cases where I think the royalty, the sort of elitists themselves were actually genetically identical to humans, but they went around creating sort of like slightly different variations of the human race and used a lot of genetic manipulation to create life on all these different planets for the purpose of actually sort of procuring them and then harvesting them for their genetic life force, I guess. And that's the whole premise of this film, is that we have a scenario where it shows the fact that the human race was actually created, it was basically seeded by this sort of galactic aristocracy for the purpose of harvesting them for genetic purposes at a later date, so that these aristocrats or these royal bloodlines could use the genes of that they've been harvesting to attain immortality.
Yeah, they basically have to kill 100 people to make this little vial of royal jelly stuff that lets them that makes them younger or whatever, keeps them rejuvenated.
Like youth serum, I think they call it.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. But that's the basic kind of opening sort of premise of the film, I guess. And then excuse me, it cuts to what is it? It's the Mila Kunis character.
Sure, yeah.
Who's basically just sort of a very poor working class girl.
Here's something about the Mila Kunis character. When I was watching it, she's the daughter of a Russian immigrant living in America. And she's like cleaning toilets, all this. And I was thinking in my seat, like, oh, okay, so this is like the classic Cinderella story, right?
Yeah.
That's what they're equating this to. And then later, they actually reference Cinderella by name, like, oh, yeah, Cinderella. I'm like, okay, well, there it is. And Cinderella is, I mean, there's all sorts of meaning in that.
Yeah.
The Cinderella, just like the woman made of ash, basically, is what
the cinders.
So cinders, ash, being passed through fire, and the triumph of virtue over vice, and that sort of deal. So they're definitely referencing that.
Yeah, I mean, the triumph of virtue over vice is like one of the most predominant themes that comes to the fore towards the end of the film. It basically presents this scenario where you've got this sort of working class girl, who was born without a country. She was, her father was killed, and so while she was pregnant, her father's dying wish was that because he was an astronomer, that she be named Jupiter. So her family emigrated to America, and she was born in the Atlantic Sea. So it's like there was this big bit of dialogue where she's talking about how she was born without a country, and she's beyond kind of nationalism, and it's kind of beyond national identity or something like that. And I kind of found that interesting, that she was kind of.
And she's born out in the middle of the water.
In the waters,
and they bring in the astrological significance of Jupiter ascending, so they get into astrology right away. And she's named Leo, Jupiter.
So there's a lot of symbolism with the whole Jupiter concept there. She's named Jupiter. Her father was an astronomer. She was brought as she was born as Jupiter was ascending, the sign of Leo, and there's a lot going on there. Leo, it sort of just presents her with a scenario where the this kind of intergalactic aristocracy who have seeded Earth discover that Jupiter is actually the genetic reincarnation of a previous aristocrat, and her heirs, because she had died, but her heirs, there's two sons and a daughter, are to inherit her estate after she died. But in her will, what she said was that when she reincarnated, when the exact same DNA sequence that was in her genes appeared again at some point in the future, that would represent a literal reincarnation of her. And when that reincarnation came into existence, that reincarnation was to take ownership of the Earth. So basically, it presents us with a scenario where this sort of working class girl, cleaning toilets, who's been named Jupiter, is actually set to be the queen of the Earth.
She's part of a royal bloodline.
Yeah, she's part of a royal bloodline.
Brought into that whole world then.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have this, sort of ridiculous scenario where, you've got the two heirs to the throne, or the two sort of aristocrats, their brothers, fighting over, who will receive the keys to the Earth, so to speak. They want to kill off Jupiter because they don't want her to become the queen of the Earth, obviously, because that would mean they could not harvest it in the way that they wanted to. And so, one of them sends out, a bunch of mercenaries to kill her, and the other one sends out a bunch of mercenaries a mercenary figure to save her, and there's all this kind of deception and subterfuge going on in terms of, who wants what, and sort of shifting leaders.
Typical stuff with royal families, they're always having these intense fights for power with one another. So it brings up that. It's an interesting point it brings up. Yeah. It's definitely, this film is heavy on astrology and heavy on mythology, just pointing out some of the deeper meanings of those two things as they tie to the mystery tradition. Absolutely. I guess right away I'll just point out that this high bloodline family that owns the entire universe, basically. Their family name is Abraxas, right?
Abraxas
is what it is.
Is it? Okay, yeah.
And,
okay.
well, I mean, it's the same thing as Abraxas, because Abraxas comes from the mystery tradition for sure, and actually, it's a Gnostic god that's identified with Mithra and Jehovah, the sort of father god, demiurge, creator of the material world, that sort of thing. But the original Greek spelling of Abraxas was Abraxas, exactly as it's spelled in this movie, I would note.
Right. I see. That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of references to Greek and Roman mythology here. Obviously, with Jupiter being it's basically like Jupiter was the Roman version of the Greek Zeus god. So there's obviously they're obviously harkening back to sort of Greco-Roman mythology there, with the whole Jupiter concept. Excuse me. And there's a whole bunch of sort of other little tie-ins there as well, with one of the Abraxas sort of heirs being named Titus. Is it? Was what it called? It was one of the
Titus. Titus is one of the brothers. So yeah, of course, that ties into the whole idea.
Yeah, that's also funny because one of Saturn's moons is called Titan as well, and Titus and Titan, of course, from the same root. So that's kind of interesting as well. But I mean, obviously, we're not talking about Saturn here; we're talking about Jupiter. But there's still like a heavy emphasis on astrology and on the Greco-Roman connections to astrologically connected deities. I mean, like back in Roman times, that Jupiter was it. That was he was number one. I mean, the peasantry had to like pay their respects to the statue and all this kind of stuff. And so, it's interesting that they would do that.
I'll just throw this out right away because I find it typically Wachowski sort of thing going on here, in that Jupiter is the male father god, right? Yeah, very patriarchal, very paternal god. However, in this film, it's played by a girl. So, and you got Leda Wachowski being a male to female transsexual. I mean, it's just a Wachowski thing they did there.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things the film was actually heavily criticized, and it had been received overwhelmingly negative reviews from what I've been able to see. And I think you mentioned that people in the Sundance Film Festival actually walked out. Is that correct?
They were walking out of the theater in there.
Yeah. So it was people really felt this was a stupid film, but at the same time, apparently, it has also developed a almost cult following among certain feminists, because they see this film as being sort of I guess touching on the whole concept of the female gaze. Which is the whole concept of looking at things through the feminine eyes rather than masculine eyes, and looking at feminine interest rather than masculine interest. And you've got the whole concept of the original sort of god Jupiter being a very masculine character, being the god of all gods, being the god of thunder and lightning and all this kind of stuff. But then this queen, this kind of the Jupiter character is a female, and so we've got the whole concept of a god that was once considered to be male actually being a female. So that's definitely a Wachowski theme, but sort of the presenting the feminine hero. And there's also some kind of feminine revolutionary themes, as we saw in Cloud Atlas as well, that sort of come in towards the end of the film there too.
Yeah, and of course the mixing of the male and the female and making them one and all that, and that's highly esoteric, of course. And so there's a lot going on in this film, I'll say. However, the technique is such that I don't think they pulled it off. But that withstanding, I mean, the concept of mythology and how they get into it here, I found interesting, and the way they link royalty to mythology is done. Again, it could have been done better, but what they were getting at was pretty profound, I think, because there's all sorts of different interpretations of mythology. There's not one way to read it. You can read it in all sorts of different contexts. You can read it in a psychological context. You can read it in a metaphysical context. and you can also read it in a quasi-historical context. You know what I mean? And this is one of the ones that most interests me, and it connects to certain bloodlines. I believe that certain bloodlines in the real world on Earth, now we're talking about in reality, I think certain bloodlines identify themselves with particular gods, and different families are seen to serve the purpose of that particular deity. And they use this mythology to deify themselves and deify their family's purpose in the world. You know what I mean? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, this was strongly brought out in some of the dialogue with one of the members of the House of Abraxas, whereby she talks about the value of genetics and how people fight over resources and over money and all this kind of stuff, but how genetics and immortality and time as a concept were the most valuable was the most valuable commodity in the universe. And there's a number of sort of scenes in this film which really do present this kind of interstellar sort of aristocracy as being absolutely obsessed with the concept of genetics and of reincarnation and of it's like genes are almost genes, genetic creation, and the use of genetics to sort of almost bring themselves to a higher state of godliness and a higher state of control is the absolute be-all and end-all as far as they're concerned. It is their religion in a way.
Yeah, royalty and their self-worship is their religion. So this is how royalty works. They base their religion on self-worship, and they do it in the name of genetics, say that their genetic bloodline is superior, and they do that while maintaining this obsession with maintaining temporal power. Like, they have to hold on to that, and they have to legitimize it at the same time by saying that they're the genetically superior ones who deserve to do so. So there's so much going on here. Do you have anything else to say in that regard, Adam?
I mean, it's difficult to know which angle to come into this thing, because again, there's so much going on. There's so many threads you can pick up on, and so many directions you can go in with this stuff. But I mean, this was one of the most predominant themes in the film, without a doubt, which is the whole concept of genetics as being the absolute most valuable, the most sought after, the most sacred concept in the entire universe, basically.
From the royal perspective.
From the royal perspective, and that kind of belief is almost substantiated in the conclusion of the film in some ways, although there is a kind of a revolutionary kind of, the sort of spin to the end, where it's you've got the whole scenario with the girl who would be queen, the commoner, rising to prominence and becoming a sort of a god herself in some ways, because she has the same genes as one of these the previous aristocrat and stuff like that. But
so it's funny because she, in her humble Cinderella position, maintains her royal status, and that is brought up as a fact. Like, look, she is royal. However, it's in a different sort of, again, a Gnostic sort of context, where the Gnostics will rail against actual royalty and say that they're wrong in what they're doing, but they will at the same time say that there is such a thing as royal bloodlines, but they rule in this sort of way that Jupiter rules in the film. They stay in this humble position in the temporal world. They're not ruling from a throne. They're cleaning toilets. But just because they're cleaning toilets doesn't mean that they aren't masters within their Gnostic sect and all the projects that they do within there. So they're definitely presenting that idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's some of those scenes, especially relating to royalty, whereby there's a scene in the film where Jupiter is with some of these mercenaries that are sort of kind of helping her, protecting her, whatever, and they ask her, they say to her that you've never been stung by a bee, have you? And she says no. And they say, well, that's because bees innately understand and recognize royalty.
Yeah, there you go.
And
so
there's this big scene.
Royalty is legitimized right there.
Yeah, it's legitimized. And there's also that scene where, there's a big, something happens and a big swarm of bees is released, and she's able to control the bees. Just with her hands. She kind of waves her hands up in the air, and she's sort of controlling them literally just through her physical movements. And so there's this kind of metaphysical effect going on there. But again, just pressing home the idea of the concept that she is legitimate royalty of some description. Genetically, metaphysically, whatever the case may be in that particular context. But yeah, they made a real point to sort of bring up the whole concept of the bee, the hive mind, or not the hive mind, but the hive system rather. And all that kind of stuff.
The real battle going on in this film is over what interpretation of royalty is the correct one. You've got the temporal genetic interpretation of actual kings and queens, and the Abraxas family here, they believe that genetics and the material is the correct interpretation. And then you've got the metaphysical interpretation being that more based on the astrology, and the astrology worked into the film is shown that that's kind of what the Jupiter character, that's her side. She's the metaphysical interpretation, the correct one according to the Wachowskis. I would say that would be their opinion. And yes, so there's even a scene where she says, I'm not your mother. The one guy's always saying, oh yeah, you were always like this. And calling her mother, like, no, she's saying that's not the way it works. Like, I'm genetically the same, but you see, the astrologically different, right?
Yeah, exactly. I may be genetically the same, so it's kind of like the delineation between, I guess, what you might call a literal interpretation of genetics as being the be all and the end all of one's being. In terms of, you are literally what you are is literally defined by your genetics. Whereas, although she has the same genetics as this previous queen, she is not her on a spiritual or metaphysical level. She is a different person. She is an individual. She's not just simply a reincarnation, and she's not the same person, as is argued by the what's his name, Balaam, I think his name is, the one that tries to.
That's an interesting name too, Balaam. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, what do you have to say about that, Balaam?
I think it ties to Baal and that sort of. Mythology, things like that. They do so many things, little things with the names. It's hard to follow every single thread, but I mean, they're definitely pulling from mythology, all sorts of different ones. Heavily on the Greek here, but there's other stuff too. Oh yeah, there's like Abrahamic stuff to do with, like, I mean, you've got the mercenary who's sent after her, who eventually falls for her and she falls for him, and that's like the love interest thing. His name is Cain. So you've got like an Abrahamic mythology reference there, the Cain and Abel story, etc. And there's some kind of, I guess there are some tie-ins as well with the whole Cain and Abel thing, where Cain's offer was rejected by God and he was kind of cast out. That's as was the mercenary in this film. He did something to his gods, which were the Abraxas or whoever created him, because he's like some genetic creation of some sort, like half eagle, half human, half wolf, whatever thing. You know what? Yeah, you're absolutely right in that he's a reference to the Cain from the Bible. I think he's also supposed to be like the Hermes character, because he has like the wings, but he kind of has like winged sandals because he flies with his boots, Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's this stupid thing that's like roller skating around the sky. Yeah. So that's like the winged boots of Hermes, and his last name is Wise, so he's Cain Wise.
Oh, that's right, Cain Wise. Yeah. I remember that now. Yeah, there's obviously a lot of references to mythology here.
Yeah, and right there with one character, multiple different mythological characters all in one movie character.
Oh yeah, I mean, even with Jupiter, I mean, how many directions can you go in there? I mean, I guess that's the I guess that's the basic, sort of summary of what the plot is all about. And of course, it's, it's fairly typical in terms of, how it progresses in terms of her being captured by the Abraxas, brothers. She sort of manages to evade one, but then gets kind of seduced by one of the other ones, at least in a sort of ideological sense, in terms of he tries to convince her to marry him as a formality in order to protect the earth from harvesting or something like that. The mercenary who had been sent to sort of protect her or to capture her ends up coming to save the day and rescue her from being tied into this marriage, because it turns out she was going to be killed. And it's all the usual stuff, lots of cliffhanger type endings where they're just about to get married, but he storms the palace and brings it all down, and blah 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 blah. And then of course, at the end she takes her rightful place as queen of the earth, although, as you say, she chooses to return to her previous life, and is simply lives with her extended family, working as a servant.
She's a sleeper. Again, she has no temporal power overtly. However, her power lies in her understanding of higher truths and things like that. And again, highly esoteric there, and with a decidedly Gnostic tinge to it. So I think that's what's going on here. I'd say it has to be almost.
Yeah, I mean, it almost. To get back to the whole cult following among feminists, which this has apparently engendered, this film, it sort of promotes the concept that the feminine archetypes, the feminine perspectives and qualities are more, I suppose, desirable and more human than the masculine. And there's this kind of, despite the fact that her savior, the mercenary guy, is a male, there's a lot of kind of, conflict between the male, the typically male desire for power and for dominance, and the sort of feminine desire for, for peace and sublimation, and for being a little bit more humble, I suppose. To put it bluntly in those terms, I guess. But yeah,
definitely. The royal thing again. There's so many different things going on. One that popped out to me was something that I've thought about a lot previously, in that you've got the art and art that depicts mythological characters, stories that are really important in mythology, things like that. And this royal family, the Abraxases, you see a typical sort of thing, that their palaces are surrounded by this sort of artwork that clearly there's all sorts of these mythological figures all around, sculptures all over the place.
Yeah.
And of course, they're living in opulence. They have this fancy, just the architecture is so fancy, and so much time and effort and work goes into it. I think the idea among actual royals is that they deserve to live like that, but beyond that, like, living within such a meticulously created, majestic surroundings, that has the effect on their consciousness that they echo that. You know what I mean? That they deserve to live in such opulence, but it's also the way that they maintain their even metaphysical powers, as much as they believe in that. They maintain their power by being in this this environment that was crafted by artisans, so much work going into it. You know what I mean? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's almost like a self-fulfilling scenario whereby they've sort of convinced themselves of their right to rule, and have thus had all this artwork and all these statues created to reaffirm that fact, and then the surroundings and the environment that they're in reaffirms
their power.
Yeah, reaffirms their power. So it's like it's kind of a cyclical thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's also seen as one of the ways that they maintain that sort of frame of mind. Like they need to be within those surroundings in order to maintain their high royal degree of whatever. You know what I mean? They require that.
Absolutely. Yeah, they need to be constantly living in a state of luxury and complete abundance in every sense of the word. As you said, it's like they need that to legitimate and substantiate their own beliefs in terms of them being superior, and their sort of genetic superiority and their right to rule, etc.
Mm-hmm. And the royal jelly, they're consuming the royal jelly, so it goes back to the bee symbolism and tying to what the queen bee actually does. And it takes basically the life force out of the drones and all that, and gives it to the queen so that the royal life lives on, and that's the one that actually matters. And it's taking that biological fact of the way that bees live and applying it to human beings to legitimate
applying it to
their
the whole
galaxy.
Applying it to the whole system of life within the galaxy. I mean, this is the way that this whole scenario is supposed to work. Is that these royals, these galactic aristocrats, basically go around seeding planets across the entire universe or across the galaxy or whatever, and are able to sustain themselves and continue to they even sort of reference I'm not sure if they use the word Darwinism, but they reference evolution, and they reference like reaching the apex of evolutionary processes and of evolutionary perfection. And so it's not simply just a human thing. It's presented and the film as being the way that the entire universe works, as almost like a beehive, whereby the worker bees and the human beings and other creatures on other planets being like the pollen or the honey, being collected, to be taken to the higher life forms. So it's almost presenting the concept of the universe as the beehive in many ways. So there's some kind of esoteric Masonic tie-ins there, definitely.
Yeah. The bee is actually a sign of royalty in the real world again. Yeah, and you see that symbol woven into all sorts of royal garments and crowns and all that. So they do believe that in real life. So they're pointing out real things here. So I think that's the good part of the film. There's plenty of bad parts of the film. Maybe we'll get back to the bad. And do you want to mention the 3D thing again, Adam? Because we haven't touched on that yet.
Yeah, that's just another one of the aspects of filmmaking that we've been talking about recently in a lot of different discussions. Is so many of these films that we go and see now, especially if the film is action or sci-fi or fantasy or some combination of those genres. Pretty much all of them, it seems now, are being shown in 3D, and it's actually quite difficult to see one in 2D just normally. It's almost like that is now the default. And when I went to see this at the cinema, I had no choice but to go and see it in 3D. And as we've discussed in previous reviews and other discussions, I do tend to believe or kind of intuit that this particular type of digital visual technology is being used to some deliberate effect, because it does have the effect of putting you in a different sort of an altered state of consciousness in some way. With the amount of action and CGI that is being incorporated into these films on such a rapidly increasing basis, coupled with the fact that you've got the 3D effect now being incorporated into the film, whether it's shot in 3D or rendered in 3D or whatever, it's always shown in the cinemas in 3D. It seems like almost all of these films, amongst all of these sort of main sort of action, fantasy, sci-fi genres, are being shown in 3D, and what it does is it has the effect of basically, overwhelming your senses to the point where you're not really able to properly understand, interpret, analyze, or critically think about what's going on in the film. And I mean, for me personally, I found that after watching this film in the cinema, I didn't really understand all of what had happened. I had a very general understanding of what the kind of general sort of storyboard was and what the general plot was, but there were many of the nuances which I didn't actually pick up on until I was able to see a sort of a 2D copy of it, just via digital download. Yeah. And this is something we've talked about in many other previous films, and it's not something that it's just me saying this. I mean, I've been to see films with friends, and they report the same experiences of coming out of the cinema feeling either nauseated and or with a headache and kind of disorientated, and not really kind of being sure of their bearings and not really being sure of what's just happened in the film. And
it puts you in a dissociative state when you come out of the theater. You can't tell what's real anymore, and you're dizzy. So something's going on there, to say the least. I mean, it definitely puts you in an altered state of consciousness. I think anybody who's been to a 3D movie can understand that fact if they're being honest about it and they're really like remembering what it's like or noticing what it's like when they're doing it. I would kind of challenge the audience and say that if you go to another 3D movie, just kind of at some point take the time to just notice how you feel, generally speaking. Like, what sort of headspace are you in? How would you describe your general state of consciousness, and is it a bit different than what you normally feel?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would encourage that, because I would, I guess, assert or intuit that this is being done deliberately in order to put people into a certain state of consciousness whereby they are unable to properly interpret what they're seeing in any critical fashion, and are simply consuming the visual stimuli and absorbing it in some way, and almost like a passive way. And
that feeds back into the agenda-driven filmmaking technique, if it indeed is one, where it's just heavy on the action, and they don't care about the typical, plot, storyline, character development. They don't care about that. They just dip in different agendas, whatever they happen to be, into a highly action-based film that doesn't really have any real story to it, and there you go. So if you add 3D to it, it's just more of the same thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is it. It's sort of, it gets back to this concept that sort of we came up with in terms of the whole concept of, as you say, agenda-driven filmmaking, where it's got nothing to do with making a good film whatsoever. And the agenda here seems to be to completely overwhelm and confuse the audience on an audio-visual level, so that whatever ideas and agendas you want to incorporate into the film are completely I guess, they're put across in a sort of a subconscious, covert fashion, more than, say, some other films which might be in 2D or which might contain a bit less action might have been. Because, when you're seeing a film that isn't so overloaded with effects and with the whole 3D thing, you're much more able to think about what's going on and to sort of have, a little bit of internal dialogue or monologue with yourself about some of the concepts being presented, and kind of, let your mind wander at times in regards to certain things that are happening in the film or certain reactions you might have. But you don't have the opportunity to do any of that stuff when you're watching a film that bombards you so heavily and overwhelms your senses so much as these 3D action agenda-driven films do. And so, again, I really do think that this whole thing is being done deliberately in order to basically sort of embed a whole bunch of different memes, themes, messages and agendas into people's subconscious via completely overstimulating to the point where they're not actually sure of what's going on, and they're simply being shown a whole bunch of images and sort of bits of script and dialogue that are just going straight past the mental firewall and into the subconscious, so that they accept them. It's almost like a more technologically advanced form of predictive programming, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely something going on with it, and I'll just mention quick right here that I was the only one in the theater when I watched this film, so
wow.
That was really weird. But I was doing it with the 3D glasses on, so I think I don't even know how to describe it. It's bizarre. I've never been in the theater by myself ever before, so that was a new one for me. I think it goes to show that I had such a bad reception to this film for one thing, but just an interesting experience, and I was forced to do the 3D thing because that's the only thing they had. So, I mean, that's just the way these films go now. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it is a weird thing, but again, the fact that this is now being done with so many films, and again with almost every film in a certain group of genres, really does make me suspect that this is being done for a reason, and that this is being done in order to completely overwhelm your senses to the point where you don't know what's going on anymore. You can't understand anything anymore. You're just in a state of kind of shock and awe with all the audio-visual stimulation, and within all that audio-visual stimulation, all of these agendas in terms of stuff we're talking about in terms of references to occult ideologies, references to elitist ideologies, and all the other kinds of stuff that we're going to be we do and have talked about. I think it's to disarm the critical faculties. I think that is the primary reason for why this is being done, is to completely disarm people's critical faculties so that they can ramp up the amount of stuff that they're cramming into the film, because without that crazy CGI in action, and without that 3D effect, I think people would be much more critical of what they were seeing, and would be able to recognize it much more than they are. But I mean, when I went and saw it in the film, in the theater, rather, it wasn't packed, but I mean, it was like 70-80% full, and I think I saw maybe one or two people walk out. But other than that, most people seemed to be quite happy just to sit there with the 3D glasses on and just sort of chow down on the audio-visual popcorn, so to speak.
I know what you mean, but yeah, I think we've covered most of what we need to in this film. I'll just end what I have to say by saying that there are quite a number of secret societies that are opposed to royalty overtly. That's part of their deal. That the Wachowskis are likely initiates of such a society, secret society, and that was the point they're trying to get across in this movie, was the anti-royal idea.
Yeah, I mean, basically that's the kind of culmination of all the events in the film. The conclusion and the sort of climax, and that kind of phase of the film towards the end is almost revolutionary in nature, whereby Jupiter, the young sort of humble working class peasant, actually does take ownership of the earth, but does so from a humble point of view, and a sort of an anti-elitist point of view. I mean, she has the ability, or at least the choice, to live amongst the rest of the royals, and to live in absolute opulence, as you say. But she chooses to go back and live on Earth with her kind of almost dysfunctional, argumentative extended family, cleaning toilets. She actually makes that choice to do that while still retaining her kind of rule over the earth. And so, there's definitely a kind of, an anti-monarchical, anti-oligarchical, anti-royal sort of theme coming through there, and it's almost kind of a revolutionary type scenario, because she is essentially taking the power away from the royals to harvest Earth and to use it, and to simply treat human beings as as stock, as genetic stock for their own purposes, and sort of is essentially putting humanity's destiny back into, if not its own hands, into her hands, as a sort of a humble goddess of some sort.
Yeah, that's definitely what's going on, I'd say, in this film. But I'm going to also tell the audience that we don't recommend watching this film.
No, I mean, you can watch the trailer, and that really tells you all you need to know. It's a stupid action film. It's one of the worst films I've ever seen. I will say that.
Yeah, it's
unequivocally.
It's a rough one.
It is. It's just dumb, one of the other, just before we sort of start to close up things here, one of the other things I just wanted to touch on again was the fact that the Wachowskis are obviously very, very popular in terms of making films that make constant references to conspiracy topics, and anti-establishment themes and that kind of thing. We've had The Matrix, which is probably the biggest one, and then we've had things like V for Vendetta, Cloud Atlas to a lesser degree, but one thing they sort of hadn't really covered so much was the kind of new age UFO alien side of the whole conspiracy milieu, and I think they've done that in this film. It's almost like they had to sort of cover all the different aspects of different conspiracy interests and anti-establishment, alternative, fringe demographics and areas of interest. And so I feel in some ways that perhaps they've actually deliberately gone and touched on all these themes that we referenced before in terms of the whole, like, Eric von Daniken, Zechariah Sitchin, ancient astronaut thing with humans being created by an alien race and being, created as servants to serve a higher race of some sort. Sometimes I even wonder with some of the stupidity that's incorporated to this film, like where they've got these reptiles and stuff like that. I wonder whether they had David Icke as a consultant for the film, so it's
I was wondering about the reptile characters too. I was like, that was an odd choice.
Yeah, and there's also all these other references to the fact that the Abraxas, or at least other royal groups out there in the galaxy, when had come to visit Earth, were the source of all the sort of UFO alien mythos. They actually there's quite a bit of dialogue in terms of all these crazy ideas that people have about aliens and all these things on cell phones which people manage to record. Well, yeah, that's us. It's almost as if they're kind of trying to appeal to some of the, I guess, radical, extreme, crazy fringes of the truth movement in some way. Yeah, so
it's definitely a possibility.
They kind of touched on a few of those ideas in Cloud Atlas, but they really went the full way in this one. You're really touching on all of these themes, and I mean, even some of the particular words and references are like straight out of like a David Icke seminar or something. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that in itself is very, very interesting. I just thought I'd throw that in at the end there because, again, it does make one wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think we get a pretty good feel for what the Wachowskis are about at this point. So it's interesting they make another film. I don't know where they're going to go from here, but we'll just see. Time will tell. And I guess I'll just take this time to thank the audience here of Themes and Memes for listening. And we'll point out that, again, we have the new website, tmpodcast.com. So if you're not aware of that, then there it is. And we've got the dedicated feed, the RSS feed at tmpodcast.com. And that also, there's also the iTunes, so you can subscribe through that, or with Stitcher Radio. So be sure to subscribe to the dedicated feed, because that's where you'll find Themes and Memes from now on. And thank you for listening.
Yeah. Thanks to the audience for listening. This is probably not the best review we've ever done, but such is the case when you deal with films like this. It's kind of hard to do a good review of a really crap film. Mm-hmm. Despite all the occultism that was rammed into this film, it was done in such a way that it was kind of hard to pull apart and to really sort of analyze. It was really it's hard to deal with, and so apologies to the audience if this one comes across as being a bit all over the place. But again, I just think it's because of just the nature of the film and being a really badly produced film. In a lot of different ways, and so I'm looking forward to
reviewing something better next month.
We'll review something much better next month. But so stay tuned for the audience. Thanks for listening, and we shall be back very, very shortly with a much better review of a much better film.
Today's episode of Themes and Memes was recorded on the 7th of March, 2015.